The morning sun poured over Aurora City, glinting off the mirrored glass towers of Titan Global Holdings. From the street below, the headquarters looked untouchable, 45 floors of power, influence, and money. The kind of building that made you stand a little straighter as you passed. Inside, people moved with a quiet urgency, designer shoes clicking on marble floors, elevator doors sliding open for executives whose suits looked like they belonged on magazine covers. In the midst of this polished world walked Kweku Mensah, the new intern. He didn't fit the image. His suit was clean but clearly off the rack. His shoes were polished but plain. He carried an old leather satchel instead of the sleek briefcases everyone else had. Even his posture was different, slightly hesitant, as though he wasn't sure if he belonged. Patricia Okoro noticed him immediately. She was the head of operations, known for her precision and her ability to make or break careers with a single email. The moment Kweku introduced himself, she scanned him from head to toe and smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Welcome, Mr. Mensah. You'll be working under my supervision. Don't expect special treatment," she said, her tone sharp enough to slice through glass. The first hour set the tone. She handed him a stack of printed documents taller than his forearm. "Coffee, 2 sugars, oat milk. Don't spill it." That wasn't a request, it was an order. Around the open office floor, whispers started. "He's the new guy. Already running coffee errands? That's all he's good for." Kweku didn't react. He simply nodded and went about the task, returning exactly 5 minutes later with the coffee perfectly made. Still, Patricia didn't thank him. She just took a sip, glanced at him, and went back to her computer. By noon, he had been sent to the copy room 3 times, asked to fix a printer jam, and told to reorganize a storage closet filled with dusty, outdated binders. He moved through each task quietly, almost with an odd grace, as though none of it bothered him. But if anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed that his eyes didn't carry the look of someone intimidated. They carried the look of someone watching. That afternoon, the weekly departmental meeting was held in the 17th floor conference room. The space was pure luxury, polished mahogany table, crystal water pitchers, panoramic windows framing the skyline. The city stretched out endlessly, and far below, the traffic looked like a stream of tiny, moving jewels. Patricia was in charge, standing at the head of the table, flipping through a digital presentation. Halfway through, she turned sharply toward Kweku. "Intern, the client portfolio report. Have you compiled it?" she asked. Kweku froze for a moment. He had been told to prepare the draft, but Patricia had given him only half the files. He had worked late the night before piecing it together, but there were still missing sections. I prepared it, but..." "Show it," Patricia interrupted, her voice cutting him off like a blade. The documents appeared on the large screen. A few key sections were incomplete. A low murmur rippled across the room. Patricia's mouth curled into a thin smile. "This," she said to the group, "is why we set high standards. If you can't keep up, you shouldn't be here." Laughter broke out from 2 of the senior analysts, Eric and Lana. Kweku lowered his eyes, gripping the edge of the table, but he didn't defend himself. He just nodded once and took the papers back. The rest of the meeting passed with him in silence, the words bouncing around the table like cold bullets. As everyone filed out, Patricia leaned toward him. "You're in over your head, Mensah. Maybe this city isn't for everyone." He met her eyes for the briefest moment. There was no anger, just a calmness that didn't belong to someone powerless. But before she could read it, he turned and walked away. Outside the conference room, the mirrored walls of the elevator reflected the city skyline behind him. As the doors began to close, Kweku's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw a single message from a number saved simply as Father. It read, "How much longer will you let them play their little games?" The elevator doors shut. The next morning, Kweku arrived earlier than almost everyone else. The lobby of Titan Global Holdings was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant whir of the security desk printer. The marble floors reflected the golden light spilling in from the street. He walked past the concierge, offering a polite nod, and stepped into the empty elevator. On the 17th floor, the atmosphere was different. The moment the office began to fill, the social temperature dropped around him. Patricia didn't acknowledge him when she walked in. Instead, she headed straight to her glass-walled office, heels clicking like a metronome of authority. Eric and Lana exchanged glances as he passed, smirking over the rims of their designer coffee cups. By 9:30, the small humiliations had already started. Patricia called him over, handed him a stack of printed materials, and instructed him to hand-deliver each one to individual desks, even though the company had an internal mailing system for that exact purpose. "You'll learn the layout of the office this way," she said without looking up from her screen. He complied without complaint, moving from cubicle to cubicle, catching fragments of whispered conversation. "Did you see that tie? Must have been on sale somewhere cheap. He's quiet because he knows he's not cut out for this place. Patricia's going to eat him alive." The luxury of the office space stood in sharp contrast to the pettiness inside it. The glass partitions, the brushed steel fittings, the enormous view of Aurora City's skyline. Everything screamed success. But here, behind the polished exterior, hierarchy was enforced with sharp edges. People measured one another by brand names and perceived influence. By midday, Kweku was sent on a lunch run for Patricia and her team. The order was absurdly complicated. 7 different dishes from 3 separate restaurants scattered across the city. It took him an hour just to collect everything. When he returned, juggling the paper bags, Patricia didn't thank him. Instead, she pointed at a bottle of sparkling water. "I said lime, not lemon. Fix it." Kweku simply nodded and walked away. But as he left, the janitor, Mr. Obeng, passed by pushing his cleaning cart. Their eyes met for a moment. The older man gave him a small, knowing smile, one that seemed to say, "I see you." Back at his desk, Kweku typed quietly, working on a data entry task. His fingers moved steadily over the keys, his posture relaxed despite the occasional snickers from nearby desks. He didn't rise to the bait, didn't push back, didn't defend himself. Later that afternoon, he overheard Patricia in her office talking to another manager. "We can't waste a seat on dead weight. He's not bringing any value. Honestly, I don't think he'll last the month." The words were delivered in the same flat tone she used for scheduling meetings, but they carried a cruel edge. When the day ended, most people hurried out, eager for drinks or dinner reservations in the city. Kweku lingered, quietly shutting down his computer. As he left the building, the street lamps had already flickered on, bathing the pavement in warm yellow light. He walked to the corner, turned left, and kept going until the traffic noise softened. Parked in the shadows of a side street was a black luxury sedan, sleek, understated, and unmistakably expensive. The rear door opened slightly as he approached. For a moment, he looked around to make sure no one from the office was nearby. Then, without a word, he slid inside. The driver glanced at him in the mirror. "Sir Kweku, where to tonight?" Kweku leaned back against the leather seat, the city lights sliding across his face. "Home," he said quietly, though his eyes seemed to hold a different meaning. Like the word home didn't mean what most people thought. Tomorrow, the games would continue. But they didn't know he was playing, too. The sedan pulled away into the night. The office was already buzzing when Kweku arrived the next morning. Phones were ringing, printers were churning, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee floated in the air. Everyone was moving fast, but the moment Patricia walked in, the energy shifted. Conversations lowered, footsteps quickened, and eyes turned away from hers. She liked it that way, commanding attention without saying a word. Her eyes locked on Kweku almost immediately. He was seated at the corner workstation, going through spreadsheets with quiet focus. Patricia strode toward him, folder in hand, and dropped it on his desk with a heavy thud. "These need to be cross-checked against the financial database by 11, she said. "Every error you find, noted in a separate file. And don't think about using last quarter's template, it's wrong." Kweku glanced at the thick folder. "Understood," he said calmly. Patricia studied him for a moment, almost irritated by his lack of visible stress. She leaned in slightly. "This is the kind of task senior analysts handle. If you mess it up, there's no coming back." When she walked away, Lana passed by and smirked. "Better not choke, rookie," she whispered. Eric, from the next desk, added, "I give him until next Friday." The words were meant to sting, but Kweku didn't even look up. By mid-morning, Patricia was in the glass-walled conference room with 2 department heads. Through the walls, Kweku could see her animated gestures as she spoke. From where he sat, it almost looked like she was selling an idea, but he soon realized she was selling a story about him. "Sloppy work, lack of initiative," she said loud enough for him to hear through the slightly open door. "We can't have someone like that dragging the team down. He's not a fit for Titan's culture." One of the department heads asked a question, and Patricia responded with a confident nod. "Exactly. Better to let him go now before he becomes a liability." When the meeting ended, Patricia returned to her office, her lips curved in a self-satisfied smile. She had planted the seeds. Around lunchtime, she assigned Kweku another impossible errand. Delivering a hard copy of legal contracts to a firm across the city, waiting for a signature, and returning within the hour. It was logistically impossible, but she didn't care. She simply wanted him out of the office long enough to miss a scheduled client briefing, so she could use his absence against him. Kweku took the folder and left without argument. But instead of hailing a taxi like she expected, he crossed the street to where the same black luxury sedan was parked. The driver opened the rear door, and Kweku slipped inside. "Downtown, please. And take the fast route," he said. The sedan glided through Aurora City's busy streets like a shark through water. Within 35 minutes, the contracts were signed and Kweku was back at Titan's headquarters, walking into the client briefing just as it started. Patricia's eyes widened slightly, but she hid it behind a cool expression. For the rest of the afternoon, she watched him more closely. She had tried to make him stumble, but he kept finding his footing. Something about that didn't sit right with her. As the clock neared 5, Patricia sent him an email marked urgent. It was a request for a report that usually took 2 days to prepare, due by 9 a.m. tomorrow. The message ended with, "Let's see if you can prove your worth." Kweku stared at the screen for a long moment, then quietly began working. He didn't flinch, didn't complain. Instead, his fingers moved over the keyboard with the steady rhythm of someone who had played this game before and never lost. Patricia watched from her office, convinced she had finally cornered him. She didn't realize she was the one being studied. The next morning, the air in the office felt sharp, like there was something waiting to happen. Kweku was already at his desk before most of the staff arrived, finishing the overnight report Patricia had demanded. His desk lamp cast a circle of light over the neatly organized pages. By the time the first wave of employees came in, the work was already done. At 8:55 a.m., Patricia emerged from her office in a fitted black dress, heels clicking against the polished floor. She walked directly toward him, her eyes scanning for flaws before the day had even begun. "Do you have the report?" she asked. "Yes," Kweku said, handing over the neatly bound document. She flipped through it quickly, her manicured nails turning the pages. Her expression didn't change, but a slight pause at the third page made her eyes narrow. "This section is incomplete," she said, tapping the page. Kweku leaned forward. "Those figures weren't in the data you gave me. I flagged them in my notes." Her smile was thin and cold. "So you're saying it's my fault?" Before he could answer, she turned sharply. "Conference room now." Word traveled fast. By the time Kweku entered the large mahogany table meeting space, nearly a dozen people were already there, senior managers, analysts, and interns alike. Patricia stood at the head of the table with the report in her hand, addressing the room as though preparing for a public trial. "This is the draft my intern submitted this morning," she began, her voice calm but loud enough for everyone to hear. "As you can see," she held up the open page, "there are entire sections missing. Incomplete work is unacceptable at Titan Global Holdings. It undermines client trust, damages our reputation, and wastes valuable time." A few people nodded in agreement. Eric smirked openly. Lana looked from Patricia to Kweku with a spark of enjoyment in her eyes. Patricia turned toward him. "Do you have an explanation?" Kweku didn't rush to defend himself. He stood still, one hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. "The data for those sections was not available in the materials I was given," he said evenly. Patricia tilted her head slightly, her voice dripping with controlled condescension. "So, instead of finding a way to solve the problem, you delivered something incomplete and hoped no one would notice." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. A few people exchanged knowing glances, assuming the young intern was finished. Patricia set the report down on the table as though it were evidence in a case. "Ladies and gentlemen, let this be a lesson in preparation and thoroughness. In this company, you either deliver or you disappear." A small wave of chuckles rippled across the table. Kweku kept his eyes on her, but there was something almost unreadable in his expression, calm, patient, but not broken. The meeting moved on, but the damage was done. By the end of the day, the whispers were louder. "He's done for. Won't last the week." Patricia always gets rid of the weak ones. As Kweku packed his things at his desk that evening, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. A new message from Father. It read, "I saw the meeting on the live feed. How much longer do you intend to play along?" His eyes lingered on the message, and a faint smile curved his lips, just enough to make someone watching wonder what he knew that they didn't. By the next day, the shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. The other interns, who had been polite if not particularly friendly before, now acted as though Kweku was invisible. At the coffee station, two of them were laughing about weekend plans until he walked in. The laughter stopped mid-breath, and one of them muttered, "We should get back to work," before they both slipped past him without a glance. It was the way things worked at Titan Global Holdings. When someone was marked for elimination, everyone else made sure not to be caught standing too close. Association with the doomed was a career risk. Eric and Lana, on the other hand, had grown bolder. When Kweku passed by their desks, Eric leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Careful, rookie. One more slip, and they'll have you back serving tea somewhere." Lana chuckled and added, "If you're lucky." Kweku gave no reaction. He simply moved to his desk, logged into his terminal, and began reviewing data entries as if the insults had bounced off without leaving a mark. But in truth, he was studying them just as much as they thought they were watching him. Around midday, Patricia called an impromptu team alignment meeting. It wasn't about aligning anything. It was about publicly reinforcing the hierarchy. She stood at the front of the room, flawless in her cream silk blouse, projecting confidence as she spoke about performance accountability. When her gaze passed over Kweku, it lingered just long enough to make her point without saying his name. When the meeting ended, most people rushed back to their desks. Kweku took his time leaving the room, and in doing so, overheard a snippet of conversation between Patricia and one of the department managers. "I don't want him here past Friday. Just make sure HR has the paperwork ready." Her voice was matter-of-fact, as though she were ordering more printer toner. Back at his workstation, Kweku opened an email from Patricia assigning him to sort through archived financial statements from the past 5 years, a task no one wanted. It was tedious, time-consuming, and pointless for an intern whose contract was clearly hanging by a thread. But he began anyway, scanning each file with the quiet patience of someone who understood more than he let on. That afternoon, the janitor, Mr. Obeng, passed by again. He paused beside Kweku's desk, leaning slightly on his broom. "You work like a man who's already been here for years," he said softly. Kweku looked up and smiled faintly. "And you watch like a man who sees more than people realize." The older man chuckled but said nothing more, moving on as if their exchange had been about nothing at all. When the day ended, Kweku packed his things slowly. Outside, the sky over Aurora City was a deep royal blue, the street lamps casting warm circles on the pavement. He walked the opposite way from the bus stop the others used, turning down a quiet side street. There, as if waiting in anticipation, the black Rolls-Royce sat parked with its engine humming softly. The driver stepped out to open the door. "Evening, Sir Kweku," he said. Kweku slid into the seat, the smell of rich leather wrapping around him. He glanced once at the glowing towers of Titan Global Holdings before the car eased into the night traffic. His phone buzzed. Another message from father. "Patience has its limits. Decide when you want the games to end." Kweku's eyes narrowed just slightly as the city lights blurred past the window. The office thought they were watching his fall, but they had no idea they were standing in the middle of a stage he controlled. The breaking point came faster than anyone expected. By Thursday morning, Patricia had sharpened her tone to a blade. She summoned Kweku into her office just as he was settling in at his desk. The blinds were drawn, casting narrow slits of sunlight across the glossy surface of her desk. She didn't ask him to sit. "There's been a breach," she said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "Confidential client files were found misplaced in the storage room yesterday. Files you had access to." Kweku opened the folder. The papers inside were neatly stacked but clearly marked confidential. His eyes flicked over the dates and account codes. They were from projects he had never even touched. "I didn't handle these," he said evenly. Patricia folded her arms, tilting her head in a way that made it clear she wasn't interested in debate. "You're the only intern with clearance to that section. It's sloppy work at best, negligence at worst. Either way, this isn't the standard we keep at Titan Global Holdings." "Clearance I was given last week," Kweku replied, his voice calm but deliberate. "And for a different set of files altogether." Her eyes narrowed. "So now you're saying someone else is to blame?" There was no point arguing. Kweku knew the trap was already set. Patricia had made up her mind, and she wasn't alone. Someone higher up had clearly approved this. She pressed the intercom button. "HR, please come to my office." When the HR representative arrived, The conversation moved with ruthless efficiency. His internship was terminated effective immediately. The tone was coldly professional, as though they were simply discussing budget numbers. Within minutes, an assistant was at his desk with a cardboard box, waiting while he packed his belongings. Word spread like fire. People pretended to keep working, but couldn't stop sneaking glances as he walked the long aisle toward the elevator. Eric leaned back in his chair, watching with open amusement. Lana whispered something to a colleague that drew a stifled laugh. Only one person didn't join in, Mr. Obeng, who had paused his mopping to watch the scene unfold. His eyes followed Kweku with quiet curiosity, as if he knew this wasn't the ending it appeared to be. Down in the lobby, the security guard held the door for him. "Tough day, huh?" the guard said, almost kindly. Kweku gave a small nod, stepping outside into the bright afternoon. A few feet from the entrance, the sidewalk curved toward the employee parking lot. Most people would have walked straight past, but Kweku turned in, his pace unhurried. At the far end, away from the ordinary sedans and SUVs, sat a black Rolls-Royce with tinted windows. The driver stepped out, bowing his head slightly. "Sir Kweku." Several employees on their smoke break froze mid-conversation, watching as the man they thought was just a dismissed intern slid into the back seat of a car worth more than most of their yearly salaries. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud. Inside, the leather was smooth and cool, the air faintly scented with cedarwood. Kweku leaned back as the car pulled away, his eyes fixed on the glimmering tower of Titan Global disappearing in the rearview mirror. His phone buzzed. A new message from father. "Now they've made their move, it's time for you to make yours." Kweku's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. By the time the Rolls-Royce eased out of the parking lot, whispers had already begun to circle like wildfire. Two security guards stood by the entrance, eyes still following the car's retreat. "You see that?" one muttered. That wasn't an Uber. Near the smoking area, Eric and Lana had paused mid-laugh, their gazes locked on the gleaming black vehicle disappearing down the boulevard. Eric tried to play it off with a scoff. "Probably rented. Some guys do that to look important." But his voice didn't sound as certain as usual. Lana didn't answer. She just kept watching until the car turned the corner and vanished. Inside the building, the guard who had held the door for Kweku earlier was telling the receptionist in a low voice. The driver called him Sir Kweku. That's not just some fancy nickname. The rumors spread floor by floor, whispered at desks and in corridors. Most dismissed it as office gossip, but a few couldn't help wondering if there was more to the quiet intern than anyone had guessed. That evening, the city's lights flickered to life like 1,000 diamonds against the night sky. The Rolls-Royce glided smoothly through Aurora City's high-end districts, past boutique hotels and luxury storefronts, until it slowed in front of the Platinum Table, a restaurant so exclusive that its reservation list was rumored to be months long. The facade glowed with warm gold lighting, and the entrance was lined with polished black marble steps. The maitre d' straightened the moment the car pulled up, clearly recognizing it. As Kweku stepped out, his posture shifted. No trace of the quiet intern now. The way he carried himself was deliberate, assured, the way men did when they knew they belonged in places like this. Inside, the dining room was hushed elegance. Soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, crystal chandeliers casting a gentle glow over tables set with white linen and fine china. Waiters moved silently as though floating. At the far corner, at a table set for two, sat a man whose presence seemed to command the air around him. Kwame Mensah Sr. was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a deep navy suit with a silk pocket square the color of midnight. His salt and pepper hair framed a face marked by quiet authority. When he looked up and saw Kweku, a rare smile curved his lips. "Kweku," he said warmly, rising to clasp his son's hand. "Sit." As they settled, the waiters moved in perfect coordination, pouring wine, placing dishes without a word. "I hear your internship ended today," Kwame Sr. said, his voice even but carrying an undercurrent of something sharper. Kweku met his father's gaze without flinching. It ended exactly when they wanted it to. The older man's smile deepened, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "And when do you want it to?" There was a long pause. Kweku glanced briefly around the room, then back at his father. 3 days, he said quietly. "I'll walk back in there, not as an intern." Kwame Sr. took a slow sip of wine. "Good. Because the people in that building need to be reminded of something. Titan Global Holdings isn't theirs. It's ours." The weight of those words hung between them, rich and unspoken. In the corner of the restaurant, unnoticed, a man in a dark suit watched their table closely, his phone recording the exchange. Kwame Sr. set his glass down with deliberate care, the soft chime of crystal against marble punctuating the silence between them. His expression was calm, but there was a hard glint in his eyes that only those who knew him well could read. "They think you're weak," he said, his voice low but resonant. "They think they've dismissed you. What they don't know is that every person in that building still works for me. Every floor, every desk, every deal, they all move because I allow them to." Kweku didn't speak. He knew his father wasn't looking for an answer yet. "I built Titan Global from nothing," Kwame continued, his gaze drifting past his son to some invisible memory. "When I was your age, I was the one fetching coffee, the one being laughed at for my cheap shoes. They didn't know I was already working on the deal that would make me their employer." He leaned forward. "Do you understand now why I wanted you to go in there as an intern?" Kweku nodded slowly. "You wanted me to see the truth from the bottom." His father's smile was brief but approving. "And did you?" "Yes," Kweku replied. "I saw who respects the company's name and who hides behind it. I saw who works hard and who plays games with power." His voice was steady, but there was a faint undercurrent of steel in it now. "And I saw who thinks they can humiliate someone without consequences." For a moment, silence reigned at the table except for the muted clink of cutlery from nearby diners. Then Kwame reached into the inside pocket of his suit and drew out a slim, embossed envelope. He slid it across the table. "Inside is your appointment letter," he said. "Executive observer. You'll attend every meeting I do, sit in on every strategy session. In 3 days, you'll walk into that office, not as an employee under Patricia, but as my representative." Kweku's fingers brushed the envelope, but he didn't open it. "And when they ask why I'm back," Kwame's eyes held his for a long moment. "You don't need to answer. Let them ask. The uncertainty will do more damage than any speech you could give." A waiter approached with the next course, a perfectly plated dish of seared lamb and saffron rice, but neither man reached for their cutlery. "You'll have one advantage I never had," Kwame said finally. "They've already underestimated you." He took a sip of wine, then added, "Use it." Kweku leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile on his lips. 3 days then. Across the room, the man in the dark suit who had been watching them slipped out quietly, phone still in hand, disappearing into the night before either father or son noticed. 3 days later, the lobby of Titan Global Holdings was its usual theater of quiet power. Polished marble underfoot, the faint aroma of expensive cologne in the air, the soft murmur of well-dressed executives greeting each other with calculated smiles. The morning crowd moved with purpose, but then the flow broke for just a moment. Heads turned toward the entrance. Kweku walked in. Gone was the off-the-rack suit and old leather satchel. In its place was a tailored navy ensemble that fit like it had been stitched for him alone, a silk tie in a deep, understated shade, and a timepiece on his wrist that glinted with the subtle weight of something no one in the room could afford. 2 corporate aides flanked him, both wearing discreet earpieces, and a third followed a few steps behind, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He didn't rush to the elevators. Instead, he paused briefly at the reception desk. The receptionist, who had barely looked up during his days as an intern, now straightened so quickly she almost dropped her pen. "Good morning, Mr. Mensah," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Good morning," he replied smoothly, his tone polite but carrying a quiet authority that made her avoid direct eye contact. As he stepped into the elevator, Eric emerged from the coffee station down the hall. He nearly choked on his drink when he saw Kweku flanked by aides. Lana, right behind him, froze mid-step. Neither said a word. They simply exchanged a glance that said everything. "What is happening?" The doors closed, and the elevator carried Kweku up to the executive floor, a place he had never been during his internship. When they opened, Patricia was standing at the far end of the corridor, speaking to one of the senior partners. The moment she saw him, her expression didn't just shift, it cracked. "Kweku," she said, her voice low but edged with disbelief. "Good morning, Patricia," he said evenly, walking past without breaking stride. The aides followed, and the senior partner she had been speaking to trailed off mid-sentence, watching them disappear into the CEO's boardroom. Inside, the long polished table gleamed under recessed lighting. Kwame Mensah Sr. was already seated at the head, reviewing documents. He looked up briefly as his son entered, giving the faintest nod before returning to his work. "Sit," Kwame said. "We start in 2 minutes." As the other executives filed in, the murmurs began. Every face in the room was trying to make sense of the intern's sudden presence here. Some avoided looking directly at him. Others stared outright. Patricia arrived last. She took a seat across the table from Kweku, her jaw tight. Whatever she'd planned for the day was already unraveling. Kweku opened the leather portfolio in front of him, pen poised, as though this had always been his seat. He didn't offer explanations. He didn't need to. The uncertainty was doing all the work for him. And somewhere deep in the building, the rumors were already boiling over. The rest of the morning unfolded like a silent play in which only Kweku and his father knew the script. When the board meeting ended, Kwame Sr. rose without ceremony and left with 2 senior executives in tow, heading for another appointment. Kweku stayed behind, collecting his notes. The aides at his side waited for instruction. "Take me to operations," he said quietly. The elevator ride down to the 17th floor was smooth and silent. When the doors slid open, every head in the open plan office turned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, keyboards went still. For a beat, it was as if time had stopped. Patricia emerged from her office, still wearing her perfected smile, though it now looked as if it were balanced on thin ice. "Mr. Mensah," she said carefully, "I didn't realize you'd be visiting this department today." "I wanted to get back to where I started," Kweku said, his tone light but with an undertone that made the words linger. "I'll be working here for a few days, observing the team." Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction. "Of course," she said, stepping aside. He walked past her and toward the same desk he'd used as an intern. Without hesitation, he sat down, powered on the computer, and began pulling up files. Around him, the office buzz slowly resumed, but with a sharp new awareness. People spoke softer, moved more deliberately, like actors suddenly aware of the critic in the front row. Eric appeared at his side within 10 minutes, smiling as if they had always been friends. "Hey, if you need help navigating the system, just let me know," he said. Kweku's eyes flicked up to meet his. "I remember it well enough," he replied, and went back to his screen. Lana tried a different tactic. "We've got a client portfolio that could use a second pair of eyes," she said from across the aisle. "Thought you might want to weigh in." "I'll take a look," he said without looking away from his work. Patricia hovered in the background, pretending to be occupied with her own tasks, but watching every interaction closely. She'd built her control over this floor on intimidation, but now it was slipping, subtly but undeniably. By midday, Kweku had quietly tested 3 people by asking them to send him documents they claimed to have ready. 2 delivered on time. 1 didn't. He noted it all in his portfolio without comment. At lunch, he stayed at his desk, going through an old set of project files. The documents were riddled with inconsistencies, budget lines that didn't match, sign-offs missing from key deals. It was small on the surface, but to someone trained to see patterns, it hinted at something much bigger. When he closed the folder, he looked up to find Mr. Obeng standing nearby, mop in hand. "Back so soon," the janitor said with a grin that wasn't quite surprise. "Some places are worth a second look," Kweku replied. Across the floor, Patricia was on the phone, her voice low and urgent. Though Kweku couldn't hear her words, he could see the tension in the way she gripped the receiver. Whatever she was trying to manage, it wasn't going her way. By the end of the day, the air in operations felt different, less certain, less controlled. And that was exactly how Kweku wanted it. The following morning, Kweku's day began not on the operations floor, but in the panoramic glass-walled boardroom on the 39th floor. A space where polished stone, chrome, and leather whispered wealth without a single word. A long oval table stretched before him, dotted with folders and tablets. The skyline of Akora City sprawled beyond the glass, glinting under the late morning sun. Senior executives filed in one by one, their tailored suits and calculated greetings forming a choreography Kweku now recognized as part performance, part battle. Kwame Sr. was already seated at the head of the table, reviewing briefing notes. When Kweku entered, several pairs of eyes tracked him, some curious, others wary. Patricia, seated 3 chairs away from the head, did not hide her surprise. "This is my son, Kweku Mensah," Kwame Sr. announced with measured calm. "He will be observing these meetings from now on." The word observing made a few people visibly relax. Too quickly, Kweku noted. They thought observer meant harmless. That was fine. Let them think it. The meeting began with a quarterly revenue review. Charts flashed on the screen, figures were recited, and corporate jargon floated around the room like smoke. But Kweku's attention wasn't on the slides, it was on the people. He noticed who avoided eye contact when numbers didn't align, who was too eager to shift the discussion away from certain topics, and who sat a little too still when sensitive accounts were mentioned. When the conversation moved to a proposed real estate deal in Nairobi, a senior partner named Ni kept emphasizing the urgent opportunity and the need for fast approvals. On the surface, it sounded like aggressive growth strategy. But to Kweku, who had seen the project's preliminary paperwork just yesterday, it reeked of inflated projections. He made a small note in his leather portfolio. Just a date, a project code, and Ni's name. As the meeting wrapped up, Kwame Sr. dismissed everyone with a short nod. Kweku, stay a moment. When the room had emptied, his father glanced up. You saw it? Yes, Kweku replied. The Nairobi deal isn't what they're claiming. And the marketing budget for it is far too high for a project that hasn't cleared the first phase. Kwame's mouth curved into the faintest smile. Good. Keep watching. Don't confront anyone yet. Let them think you're here to learn. Kweku understood immediately. Exposure was more powerful when the target didn't see it coming. Later that afternoon, he returned to the operations floor under the same calm observer guise. The atmosphere had shifted since yesterday. People were more careful, more polished in their interactions. Patricia had stopped pretending to ignore him and now monitored his movements like a hawk. But Kweku kept his focus on the files he'd flagged. Every discrepancy was another thread in the tapestry he was quietly weaving. A picture of a company where certain players thought they could operate in shadows, unaware that someone was now holding a light. By the time he left that evening, the rumors were multiplying again. The intern was in the boardroom. The CEO's son was reading old contracts. He had aides, a portfolio, and the ear of the man who ran the building. And tomorrow, he planned to pull on one of those threads, just enough to see who panicked first. The next morning, the tension in Titan Global Holdings' air was almost tangible. It was the kind of unease that ripples quietly, without announcements, but is felt in the way people lower their voices and glance over their shoulders. Kweku arrived earlier than usual, dressed in a charcoal suit with a faint pinstripe, sharp, but not flashy. His aides carried nothing today, a deliberate choice to make him appear less guarded, more approachable. He wanted them to talk to him. At 9:45 a.m., he joined a client strategy meeting in conference room 12, a smaller space but still dressed in luxury. Dark oak table, recessed lighting, and a floor-to-ceiling window with views of Akora's bustling financial district. Patricia was leading the discussion, her voice as smooth as ever. Across from her sat the clients, a well-known West African logistics firm looking to expand their operations. Several department heads were present, including Ni, who was unusually quiet for a man who had been pushing his Nairobi project so aggressively yesterday. Kweku sat at the far end of the table, portfolio open, pen poised as if merely taking notes. Midway through the meeting, Patricia projected a chart showing forecasted logistics improvements for the Nairobi deal as part of the company's broader growth plan. She moved on quickly, but Kweku raised his head. Patricia, he said evenly, could you clarify which baseline data those projections are using? There was a pause. A small one, but in a room like this, a pause could be as loud as thunder. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course, those are compiled from our latest feasibility study. From which date? Kweku asked, still calm. Another pause. Ni shifted in his chair. Those numbers are based on preliminary market research done 3 months ago, Patricia said finally. Kweku tilted his head slightly. Interesting, because the internal report I reviewed yesterday, dated just 2 weeks ago, suggests a 17% drop in projected demand for that region. A murmur moved around the table. The clients exchanged glances. Patricia kept her composure. We're aware of the updated figures. This projection is more optimistic. Kweku leaned back, pen still in hand. Optimism is valuable, but clients usually appreciate when optimism is matched with accuracy. It was a harmless statement on the surface, polite, even, but the undertone was impossible to miss. Ni's jaw tightened, and Patricia's posture became a fraction more rigid. The clients began asking more pointed questions about the Nairobi deal, questions that pulled the meeting away from Patricia's control. When it ended, the clients shook hands with everyone but lingered a little longer with Kweku. One of them even slipped him a card. After they left, Patricia walked straight to him. We should align on talking points before you speak in meetings like that, she said in a voice low enough that only he could hear. Kweku met her gaze steadily. I was just observing. asking for clarity. She didn't reply, just gave a tight smile and walked away. But her eyes had lost their calm gloss. Back at his desk, Kweku noted something important. The Nairobi deal had just been shaken, not by confrontation, but by a simple question in front of the right people. And the panic it caused told him there was far more to uncover. That evening, before leaving, he saw Ni in the lobby, speaking urgently into his phone. The words, "adjust the documents," floated faintly in the air. Kweku didn't approach. He didn't need to, because now he knew where to pull next. 2 days later, Kweku was back in the quiet of his penthouse office. Not the official one in Titan Global Holdings Tower, but the private workspace in his residence overlooking the marina. The wall-length glass offered a sweeping view of Akora City's glittering skyline and the slow drift of luxury yachts below. The Nairobi files were spread across the mahogany desk, alongside his laptop and a steaming cup of black coffee. His aides had pulled every document tied to the project: emails, feasibility reports, vendor contracts, and payment schedules. From the first skim, he saw exactly what he expected. The public-facing documents looked polished and promising, while the internal reports told a completely different story. Demand projections were inflated, expenses were padded with vague consulting fees, and the supplier list included at least 3 shell companies registered in jurisdictions notorious for secrecy. One name stood out: Vanguard Consulting Limited. On paper, it was just another vendor, but its registration traced back to an address in Johannesburg, a building that, from Kweku's earlier dealings, he knew didn't even house offices, only empty units rented for mail forwarding. He jotted the name down, circled it twice. A quiet knock came at the door. It was Mr. Obeng, the janitor from Titan, carrying a small envelope. "This was slipped to me yesterday," he said, placing it on the desk. "Didn't think it should pass through anyone else's hands." Inside was a single flash drive, no note. Kweku inserted it into his laptop, and a folder popped up instantly. The contents made him sit straighter. Dozens of scanned documents, internal memos, transaction ledgers, and payment confirmations, showing that Vanguard Consulting had been funneling money into a private account in Akora. And the account holder wasn't Ni. It was a senior board member, someone who sat less than 4 seats away from his father during meetings. Someone who'd been with Titan since before Kweku was born. Kweku's mind moved quickly. This wasn't just about a bad project. It was about systemic corruption involving people at the very top. Exposing it recklessly could destabilize the company, and worse, damage his father's legacy. He spent the rest of the day cross-referencing every payment, tracing each shell company back to a network that seemed intentionally tangled. By midnight, he had mapped out enough to see the outline of the truth. This was deliberate, calculated, and bigger than the Nairobi deal. The next morning, he returned to Titan's headquarters, calm as ever. On the surface, he was just another observer. In reality, he carried information that could quietly destroy careers, and he was now deciding exactly how to use it. As he stepped into the elevator, Patricia entered just behind him. She gave a polite nod, but her eyes flicked briefly to the leather portfolio in his hand. "Long nights, Kweku?" she asked lightly. "Some things," he said, pressing the button for the 39th floor, "are worth staying up for." He didn't elaborate, and that, he knew, would make her wonder all day what he'd found. By midweek, Kweku was ready to set the first traps. They weren't the kind that made headlines or drew immediate confrontation. These were quiet, precise moves designed to make people show their hands. That morning, he arrived at Titan Global Holdings without aides, carrying only his slim leather portfolio and a tablet. His father had already approved his request for access to certain administrative processes, under the guise of learning company operations. In reality, Kweku now had clearance to request project files, vendor verifications, and contract renewals directly from the compliance department. The first change he made was subtle. He asked compliance to reconfirm vendor information for all active overseas projects, including Nairobi. Officially, it was framed as an audit exercise for the company's young interns to learn due diligence. Unofficially, it forced Vanguard Consulting and the other shell companies to resubmit their paperwork, which would either be fraudulent or impossible to produce without delay. The second move was even quieter. He told finance to temporarily hold outgoing payments on vendors awaiting compliance confirmation. No one on the operations floor knew about it yet, but he knew the ones involved would feel the squeeze quickly, and panic breeds mistakes. By lunch, Patricia had stopped by his desk. "This vendor review," she said, lowering her voice. Why now? Kweku smiled faintly. My father says if I want to understand Titan, I should start with the basics. And the basics, in my opinion, are knowing who we pay. She studied him for a moment, clearly trying to decide whether to push further. Then she simply nodded and walked away. An hour later, the first ripple hit. From his seat near the window, Kweku could hear Ni on the phone in one of the glass-walled huddle rooms, his voice tight. No, they're asking for the papers again. Just stall them. I'll sort it with Patricia. Kweku pretended not to notice. By late afternoon, compliance had emailed him a preliminary update. Several vendors were already experiencing delays in providing their documents. Vanguard Consulting, notably, had responded with a vague request for more time without giving a reason. That evening, as the office emptied, Kweku stayed behind. The following morning, the general operations meeting began in the executive boardroom. A sprawling space of marble floors, gold-accented light fixtures, and a polished walnut table, so long it could seat 20 comfortably. Through the glass walls, the view of Akora's skyline glittered under the bright sun, and every chair was filled with managers, department heads, and a few board observers. Kweku sat midway down the table, not at the head. His father wasn't present, which was exactly how he wanted it. This was his move to make, without the shadow of the CEO influencing the tone. Patricia opened with the usual updates: revenue figures, client acquisition progress, and project timelines. Ni followed with a presentation about exciting momentum on the Nairobi deal. He spoke with the polished confidence of someone trying too hard to control the narrative. When it came to Kweku's turn, he cleared his throat and kept his tone casual. I have a small operational request. Nothing major, just something I think will help me learn the flow of our overseas projects better. The room barely looked up. Good. That's what he wanted. I'd like each department handling external contracts to send me the original vendor agreements and onboarding documents for our top 5 active international suppliers. I'll be cross-checking them with compliance records and procurement logs, just to understand how the cycle works from start to finish. Silence. The kind of silence that isn't from politeness, but from mental calculation. Patricia's pen froze mid-tap. Ni's lips pressed together ever so slightly. Across the table, a logistics manager glanced at the finance director, who quickly looked down at his notes. Kweku smiled faintly. It's purely educational for me. I'll even sit with your teams to walk through the files, so nothing gets lost in translation. A few people nodded, those who had nothing to hide. Others scribbled notes without looking up. Patricia was the first to speak. That's a lot of paperwork. It might slow things down. Then let's do it in batches, Kweku replied smoothly. I'll start with Nairobi. After that, Lagos and Cape Town. There it was, the flicker in Ni's eyes. Barely visible, but unmistakable. The COO tried to move the meeting along, but Kweku wasn't in a rush. I'll send an email after this with the specifics. Please respond within 3 business days. 3 days. Just enough time for the guilty to start scrambling, and for him to watch exactly who they contacted, who they tried to influence, and what explanations they'd attempt to fabricate. When the meeting ended, he stayed behind, slowly packing his tablet and papers. Through the glass wall, he saw Ni step into the hallway, phone already at his ear. Patricia joined him moments later. Their expressions were calm, but their steps were quick, almost too quick. Kweku knew then that the request had landed exactly as he intended. The clock had started ticking. That evening, as the sun dipped into the ocean beyond the marina, he sat in his penthouse study, looking at a blank sheet of paper. At the top, he wrote one sentence. By the time the 3 days are up, they'll have exposed themselves. Day 1 after the meeting was quiet, too quiet. From his discreet position in the open-plan floor, Kweku noticed the usual hum of activity in the operations wing felt off. People moved a little faster, conversations were shorter, and more heads turned away when he walked past. Patricia was in and out of her office all morning, making calls behind a closed door. Ni barely showed his face on the floor, retreating to client meetings that seemed suspiciously unscheduled. Kweku didn't chase them. Instead, he watched the smaller players, the junior procurement staff, the compliance assistants, the administrative officers who actually touched the documents. They were the pressure points. And when pressure is applied, the guilty lean on them hardest. By noon, one of those assistants, a young man named Daniel, hesitated by Kweku's desk. Sir, he said in a low voice, I was told to send the Nairobi vendor files directly to Patricia before passing them to you. Is that normal? Kweku leaned back. Did Patricia say why? Daniel shook his head quickly. No, sir. Just that she'd review them first. Send them to her, Kweku said evenly. But make copies first. The relief in Daniel's eyes was brief but telling. That evening, Kweku's phone buzzed with a secure message from Daniel. Scanned files of Nairobi's contracts. One in particular caught his attention. The onboarding form for Vanguard Consulting, signed by someone who should never have been authorized to approve vendors. Not Patricia. Not me. Someone higher. Day 2, the scrambling began in earnest. He saw procurement managers holding hushed conversations in the corridor. Compliance suddenly requested clarifications on vendor addresses. 2 emails arrived in his inbox from unfamiliar addresses, both offering to explain the Nairobi project if he'd meet them privately, both unsigned. He didn't reply. Instead, he sent a polite reminder to all departments. 2 days remaining. By the afternoon, the finance department reported that Vanguard Consulting had submitted amended documentation, dated only yesterday. The attempt to backfill records was clumsy, and it reeked of desperation. Day 3, the cracks widened. At 9 a.m., Patricia herself appeared at Kweku's desk. I think you're going about this the wrong way, she said, her smile tight. You're new here. You don't want to start your learning process by sowing distrust. I'm not sowing anything, Kweku replied calmly. I'm asking for facts. Facts don't distrust, they clarify. For a moment, her composure slipped. Then she leaned closer. Some things in this company aren't as clean as they look. If you go digging too hard, you might find things even you can't fix. Think about that. When she walked away, Kweku didn't watch her leave. He was already making notes in his leather portfolio, marking her words. That evening, 3 hours past closing time, a different kind of message arrived. This time in an unmarked envelope slid under his penthouse door. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It had only one line, typed in bold. Vanguard is just the surface. Kweku stared at the paper for a long time, his fingers resting on the clean white edges. The words were simple, but the implications were sharp. Vanguard is just the surface. He sat back in the leather chair by the window, the city lights of Akora glittering far below. Whoever left that note had either been close enough to the rot to know its depth, or close enough to him to know he would act on it. Either way, it meant someone was watching him just as closely as he was watching the others. The next morning, he decided to walk into the office without his usual calm rhythm. Today, he would move quickly, purposefully, like a man already armed with answers. The goal was to disrupt their calculations, make them wonder if he'd already discovered the whole game. His first stop wasn't compliance or procurement. It was IT. In a private meeting with the department head, a discreet man named Kwame, he made his request. I need a cross-reference of all companies that have billed Titan Global Holdings in the past 3 years for any international project, Kweku said. Sort them by registration name, directors, and bank account details. Kwame hesitated. That's a lot of data, sir. And it's sensitive. I'm aware, Kweku replied, lowering his voice. Flag any companies with matching directors or addresses, even if the names differ. This is strictly between you and me. By midday, the first batch of results hit his secure tablet. 3 different vendors from 3 different countries had the same registered address in a nondescript building in Johannesburg. Another 4 traced back to a single P.O. box in Dubai. And sitting right at the center, Vanguard Consulting, connected to 2 of them through shared directors. It was no accident. This wasn't just one shady deal. It was a network, a money siphon disguised as multiple independent suppliers. At 3 p.m., while most of the office was buried in spreadsheets, Kweku spotted something odd. One of the junior procurement officers, a quiet woman named Evelyn, was slipping a small box of files into a black tote bag. She glanced around before heading toward the elevators. He followed at a distance, down to the parking level. She didn't get into her own car. She handed the bag to a man waiting in a silver sedan, who drove off without a word. That night, in his penthouse, Kweku called an old contact from London, a former investigative journalist who now specialized in discreet corporate intelligence. I need background checks, Kweku said. Every vendor tied to Titan's overseas projects in the last 3 years. Prioritize those with links to Johannesburg and Dubai. The man whistled low. Sounds like you're sitting on a snake pit. Kweku poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring out at the marina. Not sitting, he said quietly. Hunting. 2 hours later, as he set the glass down, his phone buzzed again. this time with a message from an unknown number. Stop pulling on threads you don't understand. The message was still fresh on his screen when the first ripple of trouble hit the next morning. It began quietly, just a few murmurs from the finance wing that some files were missing. By the time Kweku reached his desk, the whispers had grown into sharp exchanges between managers and IT staff. Someone had tampered with Titan's internal document servers overnight. At 9:12 a.m., an emergency all-staff email went out from the COO's office. Due to a technical error, certain vendor contract files are temporarily inaccessible. Departments are advised to halt ongoing audits until the issue is resolved. It was the kind of vague, PR-friendly language meant to keep panic from spreading. But to Kweku, it was confirmation. Someone had pulled the fire alarm in the middle of his investigation. He walked straight to IT. The normally calm department was buzzing with activity. Monitors filled with lines of code, phone calls flying back and forth, technicians speaking in tense bursts. Kwame, the department head, looked up when he saw him and immediately shut the glass door to his office. This wasn't an error, Kwame said quietly. Someone deliberately deleted access logs for the last 6 months of overseas vendor uploads. They tried to mask it as a system update, but the timing is too clean. Can you recover them? Kweku asked. Kwame nodded slowly. Yes, but not without alerting whoever did it. The recovery will leave a trail they can see. Kweku considered that for a moment, then said, Good. Let them see it. By noon, word had spread across the executive floor that the intern was somehow involved in restoring the files. The petty gossip didn't bother him. It was exactly the kind of distraction he needed. While the managers whispered, he sat with Kwame, watching as fragments of the deleted records reappeared on screen. One file, partially restored, caught his attention, a payment authorization signed by a name he didn't expect. It wasn't Patricia. It wasn't Ni. It was one of his father's oldest board allies, a man known for his public image as a guardian of corporate ethics. That evening, as he was leaving the office, Patricia intercepted him in the lobby. You're making enemies you can't even see, she said flatly. If this is some way of proving yourself to your father, it's a dangerous path. People here don't play fair. Kweku met her gaze, his tone calm but deliberate. Neither do I. As the glass doors slid open and the humid night air of Akora washed over him, he realized the game had shifted. The corruption wasn't just a few greedy managers. It had roots in the very topsoil of Titan's leadership. The question now wasn't if they would come for him. It was how soon. The trap was sprung on a Tuesday morning, strategically chosen, when the board's midweek review call would have the most eyes on Titan's performance. At 8:45 a.m., just as Kweku was reviewing procurement summaries in his glass-walled cubicle, his company phone buzzed with an urgent message from the COO's secretary. Please join the board review call immediately. Your Nairobi project audit is on the agenda. That made no sense. The Nairobi audit was still in progress. He hadn't even submitted a preliminary report. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. When he joined the call, the board members' faces filled the large conference room screens. Several were dialing in from Dubai, London, and New York. His father was not among them. The chair that represented the CEO's presence was empty. One of the senior board members, a sharp-eyed woman from the London office, began immediately. Kweku, we've received troubling information suggesting that your audit process has stalled Nairobi's contractual obligations, costing Titan a major shipment window. Care to explain? The wording was deliberate, designed to make him look like an inexperienced, obstructive newcomer. I'd be glad to, Kweku said evenly. But first, may I ask who reported this information? A pause. Then Patricia's voice, smooth and measured, broke the silence. That would be me. I thought the board should be aware before the situation worsens. Kweku didn't flinch. He tapped his tablet, projecting a document onto the shared screen. This is the payment authorization for Vanguard Consulting, dated 4 months ago. You'll notice it's missing from the official procurement archive due to a recent technical issue. Fortunately, IT recovered it yesterday. What's interesting is the signature here, one of our most senior board members. The reaction was immediate. 2 board members glanced at each other, one shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I bring this up, Kweku continued, because if the Nairobi project is delayed, it's not due to my audit. It's due to the fact that certain vendors in this network are linked to offshore shell companies. If shipments are tied to illicit payments, Titan risks not just delays but criminal liability. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the AC. Patricia's expression was still, but her eyes were sharp as glass. Finally, the London board member cleared her throat. Perhaps this discussion belongs in a closed session. Translation: we've heard enough to know there's danger here. When the call ended, Kweku didn't return to his cubicle. He walked straight to the rooftop terrace, pulled out his private phone, and called his investigator in London. They tried to corner me in front of the board, he said. I turned it back on them. Now I need you to dig deeper on that Johannesburg address. I want every company registered there in the last decade. The investigator chuckled. Sounds like you just turned the temperature up in that office. Kweku's gaze drifted over the Akora skyline, golden in the late morning light. No, he said quietly. I just made them sweat for the first time. It started with a seemingly harmless email from Kwame in IT, time-stamped 6:14 p.m. Recovered metadata from Johannesburg Vendor Archive. Printing for secure storage now. Kweku was still in the office, finalizing a few procurement notes, when the thought struck him. Why print them? The files could be encrypted and stored off-site. Paper copies could only mean one thing: vulnerability. He was halfway out of his chair when his phone buzzed again. This time it was Kwame calling. They're gone, he said in a clipped voice. What do you mean gone? The files. I left them in the secure print room for less than 2 minutes. When I came back, the tray was empty. Security cameras on that floor went dark for exactly 90 seconds. Kweku didn't need more explanation. 90 seconds was enough for someone who knew the building to take the evidence and vanish. He sprinted to the print room anyway, hoping by some miracle they'd been misplaced. The empty tray and the faint smell of toner told him otherwise. Security logs showed one access badge entering the print room during that blackout window. A badge belonging to Evelyn, the quiet procurement officer he had seen hand over a tote bag in the parking lot days earlier. By the time he reached the underground parking area, Evelyn's sedan was pulling away, her brake lights flashing once before she merged into the night traffic. Kweku didn't think. He just slid into his own car and followed. They wove through Akora's glossy business district, past glass towers and high-end boutiques, before crossing into an older quarter where the streets narrowed and the streetlights burned dimmer. Evelyn turned into a side road lined with shuttered warehouses. She stopped outside a faded blue storage building, got out, and carried the manila folder inside. A man in a leather jacket met her at the doorway, glancing around before shutting it behind them. Kweku parked 2 blocks away and called his London contact. They're moving the Johannesburg files now, he said in a low voice. Send me anything you have on a storage facility near Old Dock Street, blue exterior, no signage. 5 minutes later, the reply came through. Leased last year by a company called Silver Reef Logistics, shares directors with one of your Johannesburg shell firms. Kweku's heart was steady, but his mind was running hot. The corruption trail wasn't just in the office anymore. It had a heartbeat in the streets of Akora, protected by people willing to erase evidence in person. He was about to get out of the car when a black SUV turned the corner and stopped directly in front of the storage building. 2 men stepped out, both in suits, both scanning the area. They weren't random muscle. These were corporate enforcers. This wasn't the night to go in. Not yet. He needed a way to get inside without walking into a trap. He started the engine, pulling away slowly, his eyes still fixed on the blue warehouse in the rearview mirror. By the next morning, Kweku had his plan laid out with surgical precision. The official excuse was clean: a randomized external vendor compliance review. It was a legitimate procedure Titan used twice a year, and it gave him legal grounds to demand access to any storage facility tied to corporate suppliers. Silver Reef Logistics, with its Johannesburg ties, would be on the list. He filed the request through the compliance portal at 8:02 a.m., expecting at least 48 hours before word trickled down. Instead, by 8:17 a.m., Kwame sent him a 1-line text. Someone's already asking questions about your Silver Reef audit. Kweku didn't need to guess who had leaked it. Patricia's network was quick, and the procurement wing could sniff out a threat before the ink was dry on a form. By mid-morning, 2 obstacles appeared. First, the legal department emailed him a clarification request questioning whether Silver Reef fell under Titan's jurisdiction, a stalling tactic. Then, a calendar invite landed in his inbox for an urgent meeting with the head of operations. When he arrived at the operations director's corner office, the message was clear. They wanted him to back off. Silver Reef isn't our priority right now, the director said, swirling an espresso in a porcelain cup. We have ongoing negotiations with several shipping partners in that corridor. Stirring the pot could jeopardize millions. It could also protect millions, Kweku replied. If we're paying for phantom services through a ghost company, that's not partnership, it's theft. The director's eyes narrowed. Careful, Intern. You're playing a very public game for someone in your position. I'm not playing, Kweku said, his voice even. I'm working. There's a difference. By late afternoon, Kwame confirmed his suspicion. The digital access logs for Silver Reef had been scrubbed overnight, eliminating the facility from Titan's official supplier index. On paper, it didn't even exist anymore. That was supposed to end the matter. But the scrubbing gave Kweku something even better than permission. It gave him justification to escalate. At 7:42 p.m., long after most of Titan's staff had gone home, he submitted a formal evidence preservation order to Titan's Global Compliance Office in New York. Once filed, it became untouchable. Any interference would constitute corporate obstruction, a risk even the board wouldn't take lightly. When the confirmation email pinged back, Kweku leaned back in his chair. They could leak his plans. They could scrub the logs. But now the audit was coming, and it was out of their hands. Still, the speed of the leak bothered him. Someone with high-level access was feeding Patricia's network in real time. He needed to find that mole before the audit date, or risk walking into a trap he couldn't reverse. Kweku's bait was simple in design, but layered in execution. He created 3 separate internal memos, each outlining a slightly different next move for the Silver Reef investigation. One said he'd be visiting the facility with a private audit team. Another claimed he'd requested bank statements from their Johannesburg partners. The third hinted he'd already obtained a whistleblower testimony linking Silver Reef to offshore accounts. Each memo was stored in a different, restricted digital folder, each accessible only to a specific small group within Titan. His plan was to see which piece of false information leaked first, and to whom it traveled. The trap was set by noon. By 2:43 p.m., Kwame pinged him. Hearing chatter in procurement. Someone says you're flying to Johannesburg this Friday for an unannounced inspection. That was memo number 1. The access group for that document was the Strategic Vendor Committee, a 4-person team that included one of Patricia's closest allies, Bernard Lardy. Now Kweku had his mole. Or so he thought. At 6:15 p.m., as he walked toward the underground parking garage, he noticed a black sedan idling near the exit. Nothing unusual in a corporate tower, until the passenger window slid down and a man in a baseball cap called out quietly, "You should stop asking questions about Silver Reef." Kweku didn't break stride. "And if I don't?" The man smiled faintly. "You'll find out what happens when a billionaire's son has an unfortunate accident in a part of town he doesn't belong in." For a second, the hum of the garage felt louder, heavier. Kweku leaned slightly toward the open window, his expression calm, but his words sharp. "You've just confirmed that I'm close enough to hurt someone. Tell your employer they should start worrying." He walked away without waiting for a reply, but his mind was racing. This wasn't just corporate maneuvering anymore. Threats like that meant someone had real money and real power, invested in keeping Silver Reef's secrets buried. Back in his apartment that night, Kweku pulled up a secure messaging app and contacted his investigator in London. "Bernard Lardy is feeding Patricia. And someone just threatened me in person," he typed. The reply came almost instantly. "Then we accelerate. I'm coming to Akora. We're going to hit them before they hit you." Kweku stared at the screen, feeling the weight of what was coming. The boardroom games were about to spill fully into the streets, and this time, there would be no polite warnings. The investigator's flight touched down in Akora on a Thursday morning, hidden in the chaos of a humid, bustling airport where the scent of jet fuel mixed with the sweetness of roadside plantain fryers. Kweku waited in the VIP arrival lounge, dressed inconspicuously in a navy polo and jeans. When his contact finally emerged from the private immigration counter, there was no handshake, no smile, just a quick nod. His name was Daniel Kaur, a lean man in his early 40s with the look of someone who noticed every detail but spoke only when necessary. They slid into the back seat of a waiting SUV, and the driver pulled away toward the glass and gold skyline of central Akora. Daniel wasted no time. Silver Reef isn't just a shell company. They're using Titan's vendor IDs to move high-value shipments through customs, under Titan's name, but completely off the books. Jewelry, electronics, even cash transfers hidden in container manifests. Kweku frowned. So Titan's reputation shields the shipments from inspection. Exactly, Daniel said. Your customs authority here has a fast-track list for certain corporations. Titan's on it. That means shipments under Titan's name skip random inspections. Silver Reef has hijacked that privilege. How? Someone in procurement gives them blank Titan consignment templates. They fill in whatever they want, and the shipment moves as if it's yours. Kweku's mind immediately went to Bernard Lardy, and by extension, Patricia. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. The worst part, I've traced 2 of those shipments to buyers in Dubai. Payment routed through accounts in Mauritius. Guess which board member's family trust has holdings there? Kweku didn't need to guess. The name came to him like a cold echo, Kojo Mensah, his father's longtime friend and one of Titan's most respected public figures. The same man whose signature he'd seen on the Johannesburg payment authorization. The SUV slowed as they entered the financial district, passing Titan's headquarters with its gleaming black facade and rotating glass doors. Daniel looked at the building, then at Kweku. You realize this isn't just about exposing fraud anymore. If Mensah's involved, you're going after a man your father has trusted for decades. Kweku didn't flinch. If he's clean, he has nothing to worry about. If he's not, he's been stealing from my father's company. I'll deal with him the same as I'd deal with anyone else. Daniel's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Then we hit Silver Reef first. Hard. Public. We make it impossible for Mensah to hide behind them. Kweku nodded. And to do that, we'll need proof so big it can't be buried in a board meeting. That night, under the dim light of Daniel's rented apartment, they laid out the operation. It wasn't just a corporate audit anymore, it was a sting. And if it worked, Silver Reef would burn in daylight. But Kweku also knew, when people with this much to lose get cornered, they bite back. The plan hinged on creating something too tempting for Silver Reef to resist. Daniel called it a dummy shipment, but it was more than just paperwork. They would register a consignment under Titan's fast-track customs clearance, official, clean, and sealed. On paper, it would be a shipment of premium electronic components bound for a tech expo in Dubai, worth over $3 million. In reality, the crates would be empty. The brilliance of the trap lay in the bait. The details of the shipment, serial numbers, dimensions, declared value, would be quietly uploaded to Titan's internal logistics system, where only a handful of people had access. And among that handful was Bernard Lardy. If Silver Reef intercepted the shipment before it left the port, it would prove they were siphoning Titan's clearance privileges for their own smuggling routes. Once they bite, we'll have customs waiting to scan it, Daniel explained, marking the steps on a whiteboard in his apartment. If it moves under their name, the system logs will pin it directly to whoever forged the switch. Kweku stared at the board, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the pause. And if they know it's a trap? Daniel shrugged. Then they'll do nothing, and we'll know they've been warned. Which means we move to the second phase. By Tuesday, the dummy shipment was live in Titan's system. Kweku made sure the entry looked routine. No flags, no unusual routing. But behind the scenes, Daniel had embedded a tracking beacon in the crates, its signal pinging every 30 minutes. On Thursday morning, the first ping came from the Akora Inland Freight Terminal. By evening, it had moved to the coastal port. Everything looked normal. Friday at 2:14 a.m., Daniel's phone buzzed. The shipment had been rerouted, not by Titan, but through a private bonded warehouse under Silver Reef's code. Kweku sat up in bed, adrenaline slicing through the fog of sleep. They took it. Yeah, Daniel said, pulling up a customs link. And they've already filed export clearance for Dubai, under your company's name. By dawn, Kweku was at the port with 2 customs officers and a discreet camera crew Daniel had arranged. The warehouse was exactly as expected, unmarked, high security, the kind of place you could hide anything. The officer scanned the crate's barcode. The screen flashed red. Contents mismatch. Inspection required. When the doors swung open, the empty interior gaped back at them like a hole in the truth. Every detail, shipment ID, Titan clearance, Silver Reef routing, was recorded on video. It was proof. Solid. Irrefutable. As they left the port, Daniel glanced at him. You realize the moment we use this, Mensah will know we're coming for him. Kweku's jaw tightened. Good. I want him to know. What Kweku didn't realize was that by that evening, Patricia would already have the footage, and the power games inside Titan would turn openly hostile. Patricia's move was surgical. By Monday morning, the footage from the port was already circulating. Not in the security channels where Kweku and Daniel had placed it, but in a curated special briefing file addressed to the Titan board. The title was as polished as it was misleading. Urgent. Internal audit uncovers smuggling threat to Titan's reputation. Immediate action taken. In the attached summary, Patricia cast herself as the vigilant executive who had quietly initiated a shadow investigation into Silver Reef's activities. The dummy shipment was described as a controlled operation commissioned under my oversight. Kweku's name appeared only once, in a brief, vague line noting that junior staff assisted in logistics. It was a power move worthy of the city's most seasoned corporate predators. By the time Kweku arrived at the glass atrium of Titan's headquarters, the boardroom was already full. Through the tinted door panels, he could see the city's skyline mirrored in the polished mahogany table, every seat occupied by men and women who shaped Akora's economy. Patricia stood at the head of the table, her tailored emerald suit catching the light, her voice calm but commanding. And thanks to decisive intervention, we prevented what could have been an irreversible public scandal. I recommend the immediate termination of all Silver Reef contracts and a formal statement affirming Titan's zero-tolerance stance on vendor misconduct. Applause, not loud but steady, followed her closing words. When the chairman, a silver-haired figure of quiet authority, opened the floor for questions, Kweku stepped inside. "Interesting presentation," he said, walking toward the table. "But I think the board deserves to hear from the person who actually planned and executed that operation." A faint ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Patricia's eyes narrowed, her smile fixed in place. "Kweku, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," he cut in. That sting was not initiated by Patricia. It was my design, with external investigative support. I personally oversaw the setup, the tracking, and the customs interception. And there's something Patricia didn't mention. He set a folder on the table and slid it toward the chairman. Inside were the access logs showing Bernard Lardy, Patricia's closest ally, pulling the shipment data from Titan's system before it was hijacked. This wasn't a random find. This was bait, and Bernard took it. Silver Reef's connection to him is not speculation, it's in the financial trails. Patricia's voice was steady but sharper now. "This is reckless. You're accusing senior staff without full context." Daniel, who had been leaning silently against the wall, spoke for the first time. "The full context is in the second folder." The board members flipped open the pages: bank transfers, offshore account links, encrypted messages between Silver Reef operatives and Bernard. The weight of the evidence seemed to still the room. For the first time, Patricia didn't speak immediately. The chairman looked from her to Kweku, his expression unreadable. "It seems, Ms. Mensah, that this matter is not as straightforward as you presented. We will adjourn for a closed review." Patricia's smile had vanished entirely now, replaced by something colder, calculating. As the meeting broke, she brushed past Kweku without looking at him. But he heard her whisper, low enough for only him to catch. "You just made the most expensive mistake of your life." Patricia didn't waste a single day. By Tuesday morning, whispers began circulating through Titan's marble-floored hallways. Subtle, almost harmless at first, questions about Kweku's unusual hiring process, the absence of a formal background check, how exactly an intern had access to such sensitive logistics data. It wasn't accidental. Patricia was setting the stage. In her corner office, with the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun, she sat across from a private investigator, someone whose reputation for digging up inconvenient truths was legendary in Akora's upper circles. "I want everything," she said. "Where he's been, who he's met, any scandal, real or rumored. Especially anything that could be seen as manipulative." The investigator raised an eyebrow. "That's broad." Patricia leaned back, crossing her legs. "So is my budget. And I expect results in 48 hours. While her operative began the hunt, Kweku was busy in Daniel's apartment, mapping the next step, connecting Bernard's transactions directly to Kojo Mensah. It was risky, but with the Silver Reef evidence solid, the link to Mensah would force the board into a choice they couldn't avoid. But Patricia's strike came faster than he expected. On Thursday morning, an anonymous email landed in the inboxes of every board member. It contained a photograph, grainy, clearly taken from a distance, of Kweku entering a private rooftop bar with a well-known Akora political figure under investigation for contract fraud. The email's text was short and surgical. "If this is the kind of company Titan keeps, perhaps the smuggling is no surprise." Kweku froze when Daniel showed him the leak. "This is nothing. That man was a friend of my father's. We met for coffee, nothing more. Doesn't matter, Daniel said. In this city, a picture speaks louder than an affidavit. And Patricia knows it. That afternoon, Patricia moved to phase 2. She arranged a casual board update where she suggested, without naming Kweku directly, that certain junior staff might have been compromised by outside influences. She even hinted that the smuggling operation might have been staged to target political enemies. It was enough to plant doubt. By evening, Kweku got the call from HR, a temporary administrative leave, while an internal review was conducted. It was a polite way of cutting him out of Titan without firing him outright. But Patricia had underestimated one thing. As Kweku sat in Daniel's apartment, staring at the city lights, his phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. I know what Patricia is hiding. Meet me tomorrow noon. Rooftop Cafe, Ivory Tower. And the sender? Kojo Mensah's personal assistant. The Ivory Tower Cafe was the kind of place where every table felt like a private island. White linen, crystal water glasses, and a panoramic view of Akora's skyline stretching into the haze. Kweku arrived 5 minutes early, scanning the terrace. A woman in her late 30s, sharp suit and sharper eyes, sat alone near the railing. She didn't look up as he approached. You're Mensah's assistant? He asked. She poured herself a glass of sparkling water before answering. I was. Until 2 weeks ago. Now I'm looking for options. Why reach out to me? She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Because Patricia thinks she's the only one who can play both sides. But I've seen her do worse than you can imagine. Kweku's pulse quickened. Talk. She slid a slim envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, clean, official, and damning. Large transfers, routed through a holding company in Dubai, landing in an account belonging to Patricia's cousin. The sender? Silver Reef Exports. That's not all, she continued. Patricia arranged a fake compliance audit 6 months ago. The report cleared Silver Reef, even though she'd already been tipped off about their smuggling routes. In exchange, they paid her to keep Titan's board looking the other way. Kweku stared at the numbers. This wasn't just enough to discredit Patricia. It was enough to implicate her in criminal conspiracy. Why give this to me? He asked. She sipped her water. Because Mensah is burning his bridges. Patricia's aligning herself with a foreign buyer to take over Silver Reef entirely. If she succeeds, she won't need Mensah, or you. And when she doesn't need people, they disappear from this city. Literally. Her eyes held his for a beat too long. I can get you the original documents, she said. But it will cost you. Protection, relocation, and a guarantee that if you win this, I'm not left to fend for myself. Kweku didn't hesitate. Done. But I want those originals in my hand within 72 hours. As she stood to leave, she dropped one last line over her shoulder. Oh, and Kweku, you might want to check your building's security logs. Patricia's people have been in your apartment while you're out. The words hit like a cold wave. By the time he got back to Daniel's place, they pulled up the access logs from the lobby. There it was, 2 entries, same day, both under a forged delivery company ID. And on Daniel's desk, a single white envelope. No address, no stamp. Inside was a single photo of Kweku as a child, standing in front of a mansion he thought no one in Akora knew existed. On the back, in neat handwriting, we know who your father is.